Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the Mesa City Council study session for January the 22nd. All of our council is present. The first item on our agenda for this meeting is to review the items on the agenda for tonight's council meeting. So, council, I direct you to that document. Currently, everything is on the consent agenda. The first several items are liquor license applications, followed by agenda item 4 is various purchase contracts. Agenda item 5, I know we have, we have some, I think a presentation ready on that, so maybe we'll come back to that after we make sure that there's nothing else to talk about on the agenda. But council, any questions on any of the purchase contracts under 4? 5 again is relating to the new small cell wireless proposal or rules that we have. 6 is a resolution, and 7 are recommendations from the Audit, Finance, and Enterprise Committee. And then 8 is setting a hearing for February 5th on various zoning ordinances. Any questions or concerns on any of those items? So, Mr. Brady, were we planning on having a presentation on agenda item 5?
You know, Mayor, I think since we have such a crack staff who just, lifted about 50 pounds of paperwork over here, I told her that unless the council asked her a question, we needed at least hear something about small cell tech with the efforts she made. And while she's here, if I could just real quickly, I just want to recognize also, and it's still stay on consent, no presentation, but we have spent some time in the past about our final audit, and the fact that it's on the consent with no comments and no auditor here today, that I just want to express my appreciation and congratulations to the staff who's done a lot of work over the last couple of years getting a lot of things cleaned up on some of the audits and some of just the tracking. That wasn't we were losing money, but just the way the reports were being made and how we were keeping track of some of our assets. And a lot of the reporting wasn't being kept up to speed. So I appreciate Irma and her staff for making this a non-issue item today. So I just wanted to say thank you for them. Because what we'll do tonight represents a significant amount of effort that started months ago in getting this ready for tonight's approval. So I just wanted to acknowledge their efforts. But at this time, the topic we've all been waiting to hear from. So we'll have Mary Grace and Beth give us everything they know about small cells in about 5 minutes.
Okay, so I think I'm the one I'm going to try to, my only goal for this is that you'll be more interested than you will be in the sign code revisions that are coming up. So it's my only goal, okay? It's pretty dry, but we'll.
Sorry.
We'll
I'm actually looking forward to the sign code.
Yeah. Uh-oh. This is a precursor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the small wireless facilities stuff that's in front of you and presented for you tonight is the culmination of an effort that started with the city whenever, about a year and a half ago, when the wireless or telecom industry drafted a bill, and they had a very strong sponsor and a groundswell of support in the state legislature to pass a pretty broad-ranging bill about access to the right-of-way for telecom providers. So we knew this was going to pass. The first job was for us to analyze it and see if there was anything that concerned us. And the biggest thing was, and we did this with the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, and there were 3 lawyers who were heavily involved with the drafting, and I was one of them. So the first things we did were, when this bill was proposed, it covered land that is not in the right-of-way, so private property, and city-owned property that's not in the streets. It also applied to wireless facilities like macro sites instead of the small cells. It did not exempt Mesa electric poles, so we would have had to allow deployment down here in specialty areas and where Mesa Electric operates. And it had, of course, a very low cost compared to what we're used to getting for small cell deployment in the right-of-way. Right now, we have about 10 facilities, small cell wireless facilities deployed, and these are not the macro sites, these are the little antennas that go on top of a street light or a traffic signal. So the first things we did were to pull the bill back. So the bill only applies to small wireless facilities in the right-of-way. That's really important. So if you say, well, what about that microcell stuff that they put on top of our wires? That's not covered. It specifically doesn't apply to that. And also, please keep in mind when I say it only applies to streetlights and traffic signals, not electricity distribution poles. So not Mesa Electric, not SRP, not APS. So we had a lot of meetings with the industry, and it was Verizon that really negotiated the bill, but we also met with AT&T, Sprint, Mobility, and the cities, and our marching orders were basically, if we're going to have to concede on the cost, because now with the 10 deployments that we have in the right-of-way, we get $3,500 a month, or I'm sorry, a year for each of those. And so the marching orders came down from the league, including all of our electeds, that we should maintain what control we could of the right-of-way, even if we had to concede a little bit on the reduction of that cost for the use of the right-of-way. So that's what we did. Took us about 6 months to negotiate the language, and it was passed in March of 2017 and signed by the governor shortly thereafter. The statute requires that within 6 months, so we're coming up on that 6 months now, all the local governments that want to regulate this have developed terms and conditions, so you have those in front of you. Those were adapted from our master license. So anything that we would require of them, the 10 existing facilities and sites that we have, such as insurance, interference with public safety communications, you know, when you have to pull a permit, when you have to get out of the right-of-way, that you have to clean up after yourself when you're there. Those are all in the terms and conditions. Then we also developed a design standards that is going to be really, in the resolution, you give Beth the authority to adopt and amend these design standards. Those are more technical than I can really speak to, but they have to do with what does the stealth and concealment look like? How many feet away from this or that do you have to be? They're pretty technical.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mary Grace. Thank you, Beth. Now, the macro sites, are we going to be able to put wraps around them? Or,
The ground equipment.
yes?
Yeah, because along with these antennas, there's a potential for some ground equipment. We do have some out there today that you can see that Verizon has in place. Our standards do address the aesthetics of those sites. We allow them some flexibility in that, so we can talk about walls, we can talk about landscaping. Verizon, if you've seen their sites, they've chosen to use some metal decorative screens that conceal the ground equipment. And the other thing we've required is that these be low-profile boxes. So these are very short, close to the ground boxes, as opposed to what you might see in a traffic signal cabinet. It's not going to be that big to begin with. And then but they are required, they need to submit that along with their permits as to what they're planning to do for concealment or for blending it aesthetically with the existing site.
What about neighborhoods that have specific characteristics? I would imagine that there are some neighborhoods that have
Yep.
these, unique lighting fixtures and those kind of things. Are we going to be able to regulate what they're going to look like?
Yes, they'll submit those with their permits, and then we'll look at where they're located and actually work with them on doing something that blends with the part of the community that they're in. So for instance, if you're in Fiesta District, we need to look at how that works. Or if you're in Eastmark, how does it work with the image and the view that they're presenting to the public?
And we negotiated a special exemption in the bill for places where we have maintenance agreements, places where we have specialty features, those kind of things. The shot clocks and the lower fees don't apply there. They have to submit something that's acceptable to us because the statute allows us to deny them if they don't meet our standards in those specialty districts. Does that make sense? Okay. So the third thing that we had was a fee schedule. So we've spent and the fees are set forth in the statute. There are a few areas where we have and other cities have a little bit more difference on the fee schedule than you would expect. But so it took about 6 months, and we negotiated that with the industry. We had about a half a dozen meetings in person and on the phone with both their legal counsel and their technical people. So it's been a long process, but I'm happy to say that as of last week, I had no objections on any of our documents from the industry, and they are all just happy to have this go through on consent.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Council?
Okay.
Mr. Thompson?
Chris, do we have the ability to, in lieu of a fee structure, work with the providers on some type of like internet or Wi-Fi throughout the city? You know, because especially when you start looking at the Internet of Things and the connectivity and driverless cars and so forth, they're all going to rely on that. So is there a way that we can do a trade-off?
Well, Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, the dialogue we've had with some of the providers isn't necessary and in lieu of with the fee, because the fees they're fairly nominal, so it wouldn't really add up. But what we have been in discussions with them is something we do have that seems to be of some interest to them is Beth and her folks have been very diligent in laying a lot of conduit around the city. And that conduit has a capacity that we would like to make available to them, lease to them. And so we've shared with them our maps of the conduit and where it's located. And that's how hopefully we may look at some opportunities to do some trade-offs there. And we've also shared with them some areas that we have future plans, especially around our public safety facilities and other city facilities where we anticipate in the future being able to lay conduit and maybe being able to work together on those kinds of concepts. So, and we've mentioned this to almost every provider that's come into the city about having those discussions and helping to accelerate doing something that benefits them, but also that would then allow us to maybe get technology quicker to city facilities. And specifically, I think we had a map that I saw that included schools. So we try to figure out a prioritization in a way that as either we're laying conduit or they're laying conduit, that we can hit those kinds of facilities as a priority.
We did an agreement not that long ago, a couple of years back with Zayo, you may remember it. And they built some conduit for us in kind, so we didn't have to do bond dollars for it as part of the offset in our lease fees.
Beth, whenever a utility is going through and doing an open cut, are we looking to see if we can add conduit or anything to it to
We do
save our
look at
cost?
that as well, and we ask other utilities to look at it too, because if there's going to happen, we want to get as many people in there as possible. Right now, we're putting it in mostly with our street projects, because we already do a quad deck anyway with our street projects now for traffic signals, and there's some capacity there that we could lease or allow. And then so for instance, also when you look at Fiesta District Southern Avenue, there were, Southern Avenue is very unique, and there are maybe 4 or 5 providers down there, conduit and fiber. So it's an interesting area for these businesses to want to go into. But we put we put banks of 4 conduits across Southern Avenue in a couple of locations for them to be able to get across to the other side of the street if they wanted to use a provider on the other side of the street as well. So where we can, and we know that data is a big issue now. It's like water, there's water, sewer, power, data. And it's a big thing now with our economic development folks and the people coming in, they want that access to data. So where we can, we're putting in crossings as well.
So, thank you, ladies. This is a great story. I think you prefaced this by explaining that this was all being done in anticipation of 5G coming to our community, and the large cell towers are going to be an obsolete thing of the past, and the 5G model is mini cells, hundreds of them all over our community. So now that the state legislation is passed, now the city equivalent is in place, when do we think we're going to start seeing small cells go up in the city of Mesa?
Well,
No.
go ahead, yeah.
Yeah.
We have about, I think there's like, we have, I think, 10 that either been permitted or installed, but we also have had every single one of the providers in, talking to our staff in anticipation of this, trying to understand what they need to do to make sure their permits are ready to go. It is on a first-come, first-served basis. We've had people ask us to reserve poles, which we cannot do under the legislation, so it's whoever gets here, and I think they can permit up to
25 in a batch.
on a single
As
permit.
long as they're the same kind of deployment.
So we've worked out some procedures because we do anticipate we'll be getting those batches of permits and some of them will overlap on the poles they want to use. It's really who gets their permit in first. And so they're kind of waiting for the day this goes through and they can actually start submitting permits.
The law is very extensive, Mayor Giles, and requires us to review every application for completeness within 20 days and approve or deny within 75. And whenever the bill was introduced, the industry was, as you were suggesting, talking about deploying hundreds of these small wireless facilities. And hundreds is what they've told us to expect. Now, who knows? But
So and you will probably see them more in areas where there's high data usage. So if you're around, for instance, like a shopping center and they're doing a lot of credit card transactions, they're going to want to infill to pick up the data
Right.
primarily because that's what these are mostly serving is data. So you'll see more of them going in certain areas than you might in like a residential neighborhood with large lots because there may not be as big a data need there. So we'll start to see those. You may also see more of them where you have topography changes. Scottsdale's got quite a maze of them right now. I think they're over 70 sites right now, even as we speak, under the old terms before the legislature changed. And it's really because they have a lot of topography changes as you go north into Scottsdale.
So given that I doubt that T-Mobile and Verizon and Sprint are going to say, hey, let's share small cells, they're all going to want to do their own. The thing that I anticipate we'll see in future years is when you drive into an intersection, you'll see multiple small cells in a single intersection for different providers. Is that what
That's
we ought to
correct.
expect?
You will see that. There is a, I do think we've allowed them to cohabitate on poles, but I don't anticipate that will happen. So you may have some areas where you have multiple small cell sites along various poles.
There you go. Mr. Freeman and then Mr. Whitaker had questions.
Thank you for sharing the information. Last year at NLC, I went to one of the breakout sessions addressing 5G, and I was very impressed about its forthcoming and interaction and integrating into the communities. I had a long, robust discussion with Mr. Butler this afternoon. Maybe you've heard already? I don't know if you... I just was interested in the last sentence here, paragraph. It says, we will not be able to recover the full cost to administer it. So what is our in-house cost? You say $3,500 per antenna. So I've just asked the question, what does it cost to go through the process?
we charge the $3,500 now as a license rate. So when you go into the right-of-way and you put something on top of our property, you have to get a permit. That's your permission to construct. And then you have to get a license, and that's your permission to occupy that space. So all I can tell you is we've been charging $3,489 per year for each deployment.
I will tell you, Phoenix really was under a lot of, they came out with their fee schedule, and they actually did include some additional fees in there to try and recoup some of those costs that get involved with the permitting.
So the question is, what are our costs?
Yeah.
So our costs are the staff.
There are
We're
staff.
reviewing these, right? So there's
Right.
at least a couple of, how many different staff members are reviewing this? Because the question, I think, is, what's the gap between the cost and the recovery of the fees?
It's
I don't know.
substantial depending on what services we provide, so.
I'm just guessing, if I step out in the community and they address this, and I have to address it, I would like to know, what it costs for the infrastructure, because I know it's more broader than just in the exact figure, but what we're providing for businesses to operate effectively, there's a cost to doing business, and I'd just like to know.
Right
kinda-
now, I think we're getting $50 a pole under the statute and about $750 for the permit
For the
for the
application, right?
application.
Review, inspection,
Right, but what that's not covering is, under a normal utility permit, we do something called inspection by permit. So when we get the permit, the inspectors go out in the field, they site walk it with the utility, they look at the pole, they look at the surrounding area. We talk about what design might work there. We're not able to do that under these type permits, and every city has basically informed the industry that we won't be able to do these site walks, that they need to submit a permit that's complete enough to do that. And that, you're looking at, depending on what happens there, $500 to $1,000 for a site walk. I think Phoenix had fees of about $1,000 a site walk. So we won't be doing that. They're going to have to
We won't be
submit.
doing it because the cost doesn't cover.
The cost
resou-
is not
okay,
covered.
I think that's the question. So
So-
because of the anticipated volume
Right, we
of
cannot do
these,
this.
which could be in the thousands,
Yes.
Yes.
we don't have the staff, as if it were under the current conditions today,
We don't
we
have
would
the
have a
staff to
little,
cover
we would
that.
spend more time on site inspecting, looking at the conditions before this would happen. So I think what we're saying is that's not going to happen.
That's not gonna happen.
So we're short those resources, and the fees wouldn't cover the resources we would have to do that. So we're going to rely more upon their kind of self-reporting the conditions going forward. So it's a different standard of review, which may be fine, but, neighbors are going to notice these coming up, but we'll have to rely upon the formats and the type of information that'll be part of the application process versus having a city representative on site looking at these. So in the past, because these are our facilities, right? These are our lights. So we've, in the past, been a little more involved in the observation of what's happening on those poles. But because of legislation and because of the volume,
We don't
that's just
have the
something
time or the
we're
staff.
not going to be able to provide that service going forward.
Thanks.
And those services include the site walks and the inspections and those sorts of things that go with it. So one of the things that's very specific in the legislature is we have 20 days to review it for completeness. If they are not complete on that, then we reject the permit. They have to come back with more complete information.
Just had a quick question. I know we talked about the conduit runs. I'm under the impression we have a dark fiber loop that runs throughout the city as well. Has that been discussed as far as, are we extending our dark fiber into these areas as well, or is that not something we're concerned about?
Councilmember Whitaker, I wouldn't call it a complete dark fiber loop. We have two conduit loops. One of them is in kind of the southeast part of the city that was basically Zayo helped us complete it with their in-kind contributions from leasing it. And we have another loop that we're looking at for the downtown and to the west part of Mesa. We are completing those loops when we put in conduits with the streets. And then you'll probably see on any future bond discussions, project for communications to also complete some of those loops. We put in the conduit and we put in fiber for our needs. In some cases, we have some spare fibers, but not in all. But mostly what the industry is interested in leasing are the empty conduits we put in. There was also a project done in the city many years ago called E-Streets. And so we have in parts of our city banks of 12 2-inch conduits as well. So those are the conduits we're looking at that we have been working with the industry on leasing. So we've had 2 or 3 other providers come in right now and provided them with maps. We're also allowing them to look at, over the years, we've had pipes abandoned in the right-of-way, and we allow them to look at abandoned water and sewer lines as well in the older parts of our community that they could potentially use as conduits.
So I guess my question, if we look at potential things in the future, like providing municipal Wi-Fi, where we're doing like maybe a Wi-Fi antenna on a street post or something, as they're adding these small cell facilities, are we able to take advantage of whether it's the ground being open or the conduit being exposed to somehow extend fiber in these areas, or would that just be too expensive to do at the same time?
We're having conversations with a couple of the providers about that, where they would extend their own fiber to some of these sites through our conduit.
But it wouldn't be city-owned fiber, it would be owned
It
by,
would be owned by the provider.
not an in-kind to the city.
We can, we can structure them any way that we want to structure them, and those are all up for negotiation, and I think we're still having those discussions. Be happy to sit down and go through it and talk to you about some of the
Great.
discussions.
But
we're
we've
having.
given them all of our information, that's what they have right now, and told that we've had meetings with them to say, okay, now come back with some proposals, here's what our goals are. either we need to get there, or we could lease it from you, or vice versa. So, but they have our infrastructure
Yes, they do.
in front of them, so that they're supposed to come back to us with some ideas.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Any more questions concerning this item? Thank you very much, ladies.
Thanks.
And just to, before we wrap up the agenda for upstairs, I think it is, again, just saying amen to what Mr. Brady said earlier about the report. That it's probably good to note that in our Council Audit, Finance, and Enterprise Committee, we did review the city's comprehensive annual financial report, also known as the CAFR. And again, just kudos to our audit team, no comments. The reason it's not off the consent agenda is because we had some real professional people that did a good job on that. Okay, anything else to talk about for upstairs, gentlemen? If not, the next item on this agenda is to hear reports on meetings and conferences attended. Anything? Mr. Luna?
Yes, we just had a ribbon cutting at Falcon Field Airport, Precision Heli Support. So it's a new manufacturing company located in Falcon Field Airport, so we're very proud of that. Also, if it's okay, I'd like to mention that I have a student from Mesa LTD, Cindy Reddy's. She's shadowing me today, wants to learn about city government, so thank you for being here, Cindy.
After I was with Mr. Luna at the heli support ribbon cutting, which was very cool, a World War II era hangar that is now home to a very modern operation at Falcon. I went to the the Southwest Natural History Museum event at our museum on Saturday morning, and it was wall-to-wall kids. It was the preschool program, and so if you brought a preschooler, you got in free. And I thought I was at Disneyland. It was so well attended. So just congratulations to the Southwest Museum. They did a great job, and the next opportunity that anybody hears about this pre-K program at the museum, grab any preschooler you can. It was a lot of fun. So congratulations for a great event there. Any other reports or conferences, council? If not, the next item is scheduling of future meetings and general information. Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a reminder to the council, I think we sent this notice out. We won't be having a study session this Thursday. We have some members of the council that will be out or will have to be leaving early. So we've pushed that study session back to February 1st. And the long-awaited introduction of the sign code will begin phase one, part one, I guess. Part one will be on February 1st. We had to break it up a little bit, make it a series, to get people's attention. So that'll happen. So our next study session will be February 1st at 7:30. This Saturday, January 27th, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. is the annual historic home tour, and the tickets are available online at valleyhistoricinc.com. valleyhistoricinc.com. So invite everyone to come and see the buildings in, historic buildings in Mesa. Also, this Saturday is the annual Regional Unity Walk. It'll start at 4:30 p.m. It goes from 4:30 to 7 p.m. at the Tempe Beach Park. And so we invite everyone to come. No registration is required, so just show up at the Tempe Beach Park. What's our color? Do we know what our color is, shirt color this year?
I think it's a teal.
Teal?
Yeah, it's multicolored.
Something, yeah, multicolor, so
Multicolor.
look for the Mesa group, they'll be there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. If there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you, gentlemen. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.